Welcome back to the Drawing Database. Professor Marc Leone here, and today we're going to spend 15 minutes with the Limburg brothers, the brother team Herman and Jean and Paul. They're Netherland-ish painters in that region in the era of the late medieval period around 1370. When roughly they were born 1370 to 1380, and then the death around the 1416 or so at that time. That puts them squarely in kind of a transition period from the late Gothic era to the earliest of the Renaissance, just like Giotto, but these are Northern European artists. So if we take a look now at these wonderful illuminated manuscripts, and many of these are generally from their work, the Trebuchet Roi of Duke Berry, created by the brothers and considered to be really the masterpiece of Gothic style of illuminated manuscripts. And when we mean manuscripts, we're talking about books of poetry, books of narration, of biblical themes, etc., and so on. And so that's essentially what we see here. These also, if you'll remember back, if you've seen Indian miniatures as well, and these will relate back to the size and also some of the stylistic similarities there. So what we see in terms of the drawing structure, we have a very relatively flat style, but we do have some one-point understanding of not only the table here, but also the ellipses of all the banquet that's going on with this kind of festival. We do get some nice scale changes with the structure of the drawing of the individuals here in front. And then also the dog here, and then moving back compositionally, we get some profile views, and then some minimizing of scale and size to fit the army in the back, and then of course around and out of the composition here to the far right. What we don't get is an understanding yet of true accurate linear perspective. We still are stacking, basically coming up horizontal, and the further away we get, the higher up the picture plane is of those individuals. However, we are getting a minimization and shrinking of the scale and size, so that's starting to work and to get a more a naturalistic understanding of space. But what we also don't get here is atmospheric perspective in the art of disappearance that Leonardo da Vinci talked about. As objects recede from us, they get cooler, they get grayer, the contrast gets to be quite a bit less, and of course we combine that with linear perspective, and their size is diminished in relationship to their proportion and scale to a vanishing point. Our second image here is a scene of wintertime. It has a lovely narrative quality of laboring during the winter months, snow-covered farm agricultural scene, and we have a lovely scenario inside, women inside warming themselves by a fire here in the cottage, and then moving through a very changed scale. So we have a very flat, incongruent scale change, but that is held together by a charming and quite convincing stylization of both animal and human form and nature. As we move the composition, the lovely diagonals that move us across the drawing structure, formally in terms of composition, moves us here. Then we move back over, and we're moved by the tower here, the grain tower, and then over through the woodcutter, through the forest, back to the shepherd or the worker with the donkey, and then over to the town, the Northern European town, in the middle or dead of winter, probably February here or January. So we see that wonderful compositional structure that uses scale diminishment in diagonals as the Limburg brothers move us around through the composition. Of course, it's beautifully painted in a relatively flat style, but what we do get in the drawing is obviously the change of scale, but great stylization in the beautiful winter branches and trees, the clarity, the understanding of some three-dimensional form, but also better than that, how to really control edges, soft edges and hard edges in the drawing, in the beautiful depth of the interior from the scale of the front figures as they move further back in space, and then the darkness, relative darkness of the room, and as it lightens up, kind of opens up perhaps a barn or the opening of a cottage. And that's really well rendered and believable in illusionistic space, and it has some nice, really strong attempts at one-point perspective as we move down the composition. Those are quite lovely. You know, we haven't talked about the compositional structure used in these images, and you can see they use the semicircle connected to the rectangle here, right, across the image, and we see that consistently, which gives us a softening of the page a little bit, gives us some negative space out here, but a calendar kind of effect that we see. We're in different parts of the year calendar. Here we're in, you know, late summer, maybe perhaps just the beginning of early fall, and we see a plowman here horizontally coming across. But what's lovely about the drawing structure, he really reduces the scale and squeezes us down into kind of this crossroad here, right? We see the crossroad, and we see other farmers, maybe vineyard people working in a vineyard, tilling the winery, the vineyard there, and then collecting granary there, and we see it, most of this barren land here, and then grazer, it looks like, of sheep there, and then the walled off city center where probably the palace was for the agrarian feudal king at that point in time. So the composition is relatively still flat, but we're getting some movement back in space in terms of atmospheric perspective. It's starting to lighten up and less contrast as we see back here. There's less detail and more detail as we get closer to the image, and the scale bumps up more accurately. And the rendering of the ox and the cart, the drawing of the cart, is very naturalistic and very believable too, as well as the scale of the figures. There's still some scale disjunction here compared to these walls with these figures. They would be giants if they stepped forward up to here. So there's still a misunderstanding or lack of complete understanding of linear perspective, which will be resolved within the next 100 or so years with Brunelleschi and others who came to, and Giotto, as well as Uccello and others, to finalize perspective. Here we see the same kind of compositional idea. Again, the semicircle, the calendar here, the Gemini here, and we see perhaps Virgo, and we see other symbols of another horse and rider, a moon coming out, or a lantern, excuse me. And then we get what really relates quite well in a Northern European way to, again, the flatness of the late Gothic style, but yet it becomes the transitional style is the drawing and the understanding of painting and how light reacts onto figures. We get more individualized faces. So if we can go up a little bit here to see a little bit further, more individualized faces, more expressions here of music, of trumpeteering, different compositional diagonals. And so we get a liveliness that's missing in even in Giotto's work at some time. So there's some advancement in the rendering, the tiny, delicate drawing laid in and then painted over in watercolor type, probably temper type materials with water-soluble type of structures, cake type structures, earthen materials. And then we see the lovely drawing structure of the knotted forest there with its lovely symbolized foliage of the trees, and then the offset of the cathedral and the rest of the city castle here in the background. So it really gives us a nice sense of depth of space and feeling there, as we still get a relative flatness still with some of the robes, but we get more three-dimensionality, at least with the females, and you can see the anatomy of the forms, the stylized riders coming through in their long kind of rubbery bodies, and of course the elegant style of the time, of fashion of that time. Very nice, controlled, very crystal clear drawing and also painting to symbolize the late Gothic, early transition to Renaissance art. So here in this image, again, we see the relative same composition, the rectangle here and the semicircle, and then we see the signs of the zodiac and the calendar in through here. So it really registered for a time of year based on agrarian society and feudal society. We see down below probably one of the more naturalistic compositions by the Limbourg brothers, where they really started to understand more depth of space and use of diagonals, as we understand composition here with a lovely diagonal through here up to the individual, the rancher, and then the nice diagonal leading us up to here. As we see these individuals, we come up and over, and then this angle gets us over here, and then we get the lovely blue mountain back here, and perhaps looks like a little bit of a lake to pull us the rest of the way and follow this diagonal. So we get a very naturalistic progression from foreground, middle ground, background that works not only in relative scale. This might be a little large, but that probably still works out. But we get a nice scale change between the drawing of the front rancher and the folks in the background here, but this lovely change of color and value and less contrast as we move way back here into this mountainside valley where there's a lake, really pastoral and kind of Arcadia. And the drawing is very controlled, it's stylized, but it's also getting more naturalistic, rounding of forms, playing off some idea of a lit surface that makes logical, physical sense in the natural world. So we see them moving forward in their not only their conceptions, but also their technical application of drawing and also painting. And then lastly, I thought we'd leave off with this image. It's kind of a collection of a homogeneous male and female body figure here, with the two figures turned from each other, and we have all the signs of the zodiac here. I thought were interesting, and so we're engaging the stars, mythology, and then we have the signs of the zodiac coming again back in through these sort of American football or rugby football shaped sort of semicircle diamonds here as well, and the lilies here, French lilies, fleur-de-lis there, and then the illuminated scripting here, the beautiful writing, just gorgeous sense of design overall. And of course we can't forget the outside shape too of the smaller shapes that we see here that are repeated in the larger structure, and then the constant moving of these delicate sort of wonderful cloud forms that we get. There's so much wonderful clarity to see here. So the drawing is simple, it's clear, it's very readable, it's very controlled, very small, and the delicate rendering, let's go in a little closer, of the anatomy of the figure starts to signal an understanding of the true anatomy of our nature, of our bodies, more so in these larger figures, probably less so here a little bit, but the understanding of facial structure, hair, the beautiful, subtle, soft rendering of the anatomy of the figures in the bone. You can see the bones coming through the patella, as well as the tibia, fibia in through here, the buttock, and the pelvic area through here, deltoids and shoulders. So there's a real beginning observational now understanding that we see coming from the Limbourg brothers, I think, that pushes it forward from Giotto's, a little bit after Giotto's time. Whether they got to witness his work is not known to me, but they certainly were pushing the naturalism of the observable world and the tools that we use to help shape the illusion of natural space onto the surface with greater dexterity than ever before. Remember, we're in still in the late Gothic era, the late 1200s to early to middle 1300s there. And so the Renaissance would not truly come about for another 50 to 100 years in Italy and then on to Northern Europe. So the Limbourg brothers should be on your list. Hopefully, again, with all of these 15-minute sections, hopefully they will pique your interest and make you want to go seek out their work further, and also the work that their peers that would relate to them as well. All right, take care. I'll see you for the next 15-minute section. Bye-bye.